We did the launch, we played it, now it's time for a review. The Callisto Protocol, my nutshell review is if you are a fan of action horror or maybe survival horror, most notably a game like Dead Space, then pick this game up now. The stability issues are basically gone as far as I can tell. It is a good game that you will enjoy, but there are some rough edges. If you're on the fence about it and you're not sure if you want it or not, then I would suggest waiting for a sale or maybe a content update in the future to sweeten the deal a little bit. First, things that are good. The game is good overall. The presentation is generally good. Combat feels generally good. The monsters are brutal. They're frightening. It's very atmospheric. Graphics look nice. Generally, there are some rough spots. The general presentation of the game is pretty good. The reason it took me 19 hours, maybe 18 or 19 hours, I played the game very slowly. I was allowing the best possible atmospheric soaking into my mind and allowing the tension to build. I would move around slowly in general, looking at things, listening to things, to try to get the best possible experience I could. If you run through things, and play on a lower difficulty, you're going to beat the game in probably 10 to 15 hours. Now some things that are not so good. The weapon choice in Callisto Protocol is not that impressive. There's 2 pistols with differing attack properties, and there's 2 shotguns with varying attack properties, and there is a 3-round burst fire assault rifle. We'll get to the baton in the melee combat later. Those 5 weapons are not that interesting. Now, I'm not saying we should not have pistols or shotguns or assault rifles, but if that's the only thing you have and there's nothing else unique, for example, a spinning blade or tripwires or flamethrowers or whatever else Dead Space has, then I am going to say it's a little bit underwhelming. Here's a suggestion though. If it is cost prohibitive to develop additional weapons, then try different ammunition types, right? Incendiary rounds, acid rounds, stasis rounds, premium and cheaper rounds, something that you can do to make decisions that you can juxtapose your upgrades with the ammunition types to create the decision. Maybe the fire will cauterize the tentacle and mutation mechanic, or do types of damage, whatever. That would be a good way to add options into the gameplay in place of exotic weaponry. Although the gadget that you'd switch around to change the weapon, that was kind of a flavorful addition, I feel like. It was practical. However, selecting weapons was very tedious. I would have trouble sometimes switching to what I wanted in a heated moment. And for some reason, I swear there's a bug where if it didn't work quite right, it would default to the skunk gun. Computer players like me, we have the number keys. Let us just tap a number to access the weapon. Tapping 2, scrolling with the mouse wheel, and then clicking to engage that. Then going through an animation where if you're interrupted, it doesn't switch to that weapon, can get very cumbersome. Monster variety. Overall, the monsters, I liked the monsters, but they were very samey. And I had this concern before the game came out. I was talking about how a lot of the monsters in the game looked humanoid, and they were. Most of the monsters were just a person shape. Unfortunately, also, almost every monster was a melee fighter. Additionally, unfortunately, they almost all had the exact same tempo. They run after you, they do a 1, a 2, or a 3-ish kind of combo, and you would do the dodging, and you would do return attacks, either with your weapon, your gun, or a baton, or some combination of those things. Now, I will say that the combat felt very heavy and desperate and brutal, and that's what you want. But there's very little room for style in the combat. First, add more weapon types. Add more choice within a given weapon type, with ammunition types, whatever. More mutations for monsters. Maybe have like mutation tendencies. So let's say there's like 5 possible mutations that a monster can do or that exist in the game. Certain melee monsters can choose from mutation type 1 or 2 and rarely 3, and then the ranged enemy can mutate to 3 or 4, and then like advanced enemies can mutate to 5 or whatever it is. And you have these tendencies of mutation, so it's unpredictable, right? Because ultimately what you want to maintain as a general rule of thumb in horror is you want to maintain uncertainty, a lack of control, not control. The player should not feel like they're constantly in control of the combat, because then you get the sense of confidence, and you want to shatter that. That's the point of horror. So you have the monster types, more monsters, more mutations. And then for the melee system, it is okay if the melee system is relatively simple. What's not okay is that there's no choice. Here's a little rule. If your combat in your game is roughly 50% melee, and you only have one option for melee, you're not doing something right. There's 5 guns with different variations. Even though they are kind of samey, at least you have options there. There's no like baton type 1, 2, and 3, or like the electric sledgehammer thing, or whatever the other thing is. It's just the baton. They need to expand the melee system with at least additional options. You can keep the exact same melee combat as it is right now, add options, it will feel way better. So here's an idea that I had. They already have a battery system for the grip. Imagine if the batteries were universal, and you could put those batteries in the grip to use the grip, or you could charge the melee attacks of the baton, or you could use it on your shiv in a certain way, like a tactical knife of some sort. Here's how it would work. If you use the baton without a battery, it works sort of like how it does now. If you turn the battery on, then you get empowered attacks. If you block without the battery, it's the current block. If you block with the battery active, it shocks the enemy. If you do the shiv as it is now, you do big damage on a sneak attack, but you likely don't kill the enemy. If you do the battery version of the shiv, so you do like the stab, and then you can tap a button and he'll like zap, kills it, but it uses battery charge. So simple additions to the game like that. Now you're deciding, how should I use my battery? What should I use it on? Now mix in the ammunition types I mentioned before. So now you're deciding, okay, what guns do I want to use? What ammunition types do I want to use for what reason? How does my gear choice and my resource choice plug into my play style and the threats that are potentially in front of me? The game is missing that sort of thing. There's a little bit of that, but it's not nearly enough. This is also related to a comment I want to make. So they call this game a survival horror game. What is the survival mechanic? Can you answer the question? Because I can't. There's no fatigue, there's no hunger, there's no injury system, there's no disease or anything. I'm not saying we should add food to the game, but you need something that you are thinking about in the long-term and strategic sense for resources. An injury system would fit this game very well. It would fit the desperate, brutal, heavy combat. I'm reminded of Prey 2017, which had a simple but relatively effective injury system that was an optional system you could add into it. And they had things like burn trauma, which would lower maximum life, concussion, which would like lower your maximum mana in the game. And then they had, I think, a broken bone, which I think would prevent sprint and would increase fall damage or something. And there was hemorrhage, which would, if you sprinted or did certain actions, you would lose life, like you're bleeding out. And then there was also some items that would remove those effects. I think there was also radiation poisoning too. There's radiation poisoning. That's what we need in this kind of game. Injuries, things that make you limp to the next checkpoint. You're figuring out your supplies. Do I use a heal? Do I use a stint to fix my bone? Do I use this and that? This would, of course, warrant a expanded inventory system. Right now, you get 6 slots, which is kind of a joke. It's easier when you get your suit. You get 12 slots, but 6 is not enough. And if we added these new items, which would really expand the game, that are relatively easy additions, like you could do like a random chance. Like if an enemy hits you square at max damage, you don't block it, you don't dodge it. There's like a 25% chance or whatever to like get a broken bone. Or maybe like the brutes can break your bones easier, or whatever the mechanic is. A stash. There needs to be a stash, right? There's the stores, which could function like a stash. That's similar to Dead Space. But probably also add some kind of like stashes here and there in the game that you can access in between stores, as well as the stores for your stash. Oh, I want to say too, so when I first played the game, I was before the patch, so it was rough. And I was like, man, this is kind of rough. I'm kind of like legitimately unsure about this game. Then they released the patch, much smoother, bumped the graphics up, and things looked a lot better. And it was just before I was going outside for the first time. And I was like, this looks great. Like the outside looks awesome. Then we get into the abandoned colony, and I thought it looked really good. That was my favorite part in the game. I really liked the run-down look of that. And then the reason I like the sleepwalkers, I like designs of enemies that are difficult in an unusual way. So it's the idea of like, I'm sneaking past this enemy. They're not too tough, but if you wake one up and it screams and they all get mad at you or make too much noise and they come after you, then the mutation mechanic shines there, where it's like this panic mode. It's like, I gotta kill these things, maybe as silent as possible, and I gotta keep an eye on the mutating, or it gets out of hand fast. And that sense of I'm not in control is what you're looking for this kind of combat. Now, unfortunately, everything was melee. And they actually did have a really smart moment. There was some bait that they use for the sleepwalkers. They would put a sleepwalker right in front of a ladder, and you might panic shoot it and then cause like several of them to come after you. Or there was one part where they put a ranged enemy with it that was like easy to shoot, but there was like 3 or 4 sleepers waiting for you to shoot. And I had the wherewithal to not shoot it. And I was like, okay, this is that moment. But it was very clever. But they didn't do that like a lot. There wasn't like a lot of clever use of the enemies. They were just kind of there. That comes with time. When you design an enemy set, you get better at how to use those enemies as you make more and more content. The function of the enemies and how you can relate those with other enemy types or like hazards or whatever will improve as you use them. And I want to say too, it's not like the unusual enemies like the sleepwalkers are just awesome by themselves. They have to be juxtaposed against the normal enemies. So a lot of people don't give normal enemies enough credit, in my opinion. Simple enemies are kind of how you anchor yourself as a player into the mechanics of the game and get comfortable. And then the other enemies that they spin something on its head, I think that works best when you have the basic enemies in the first place to compare to the unusual enemies. While making this video, the new web camera came in. It's my first crowdsourced piece of hardware for my little studio. It records like more vertical and like lower. You can like weirdly see my fan and my counter or whatever in the back there. The camera was purchased almost entirely with Twitch subs, which is kind of cool, right? A little nicer. So that's kind of neat. I deeply appreciate it, but I didn't notice this until I bought it. It doesn't pivot left and right, which is kind of strange. And it has like something in my eye suddenly. Okay. Webcam's all crooked and weird now. I haven't got it figured out yet. Traversal animations. Can we stop with this? This is like ridiculous how much you crawl and shimmy and all these animations. They're not bad, but they are tedious. Now, remember the part you go between like the lockers or something and like the body is hanging out with like the spiderweb kind of stuff and his eye opens up and he's like, and his jaw like cracks, whatever? That's fine. If you want to show me something interesting or create like a tense moment where I'm in the animation and I'm looking at what's ahead and I'm like, when should I leave it? But just adding them to add it is dumb. Remove 90% of that stuff. It's the only complaint I've heard about the new God of War game. I've not played it. I heard people complaining about that there's just too many traversal animations. I'm currently in my second run of Callisto Protocol. On both runs I've played on the highest difficulty. Oh my gosh. The boss that you fight on the platform, the first time you fight a two-head, I could not figure out how to kill that thing. I must have died in that thing like 30 times. And I didn't realize, this is another really annoying thing. When you shoot him enough, he goes down on his knees. What you're supposed to do is you're supposed to use the light combo, 1, 2, 3. And then he tears off part of his body and continues to attack. You do that again to kill him. That's fine. But what's stupid is that like he'd go on his knee, I just start unloading on him with a shotgun, bam, bam, bam. And he'd get up, he'd go back down. I'd be unloading mag after shell after bullet into him. And then I would get out of ammo. I'd just start doing heavy attacks. But you can't use heavy attacks. You have to use light attacks. Are you kidding me? That's just so bad. It looks like a stun animation, like you did enough damage to him, so you get a moment of free damage, and he gets back up and continues. But of course, I couldn't ever kill him that way. And then at one point, I accidentally did the light combo without realizing it. I didn't connect that that's what put him into phase 2. But anyway, I just didn't understand it. Bad information. In this second run, I'm using much more of the baton, and I'm trying to block. So I dodged everything in the first one, and there actually is more nuance to the melee combat than I originally thought, because blocking opens up the leg sweep, and the different like attack properties and blocking properties of the baton are expanded once you access different upgrades. I'm like one upgrade from getting all the baton upgrades, and I'm not going to upgrade the guns to see how they function without upgrades. Sort of like a challenge run as well. I also noticed too, you can sort of chain combos together. So you can do 1 or 2 light attacks and or 1 heavy attack and flip to the other one. So if you go heavy to light or light to heavy, and back and forth in one continuous motion, you don't have a pause. If you do the second heavy attack or the third light attack, you have a pause. I also noticed too, you can chain against the enemies harder. You can do something like light, light, heavy. They fall on the ground, and you can sometimes get a stomp off, or you wait a half second or so, they get back up, you hit them more, you shoot them to stun them, usually staggers them, and you go back into more melee, and you can chain a lot of stuff together that way. Another kind of item is the health is really uninspired. I think what they should do, and this is just a good idea in general when you want to think of strategical survival game resource usage. Is my fan weird? It looks weird to me. Maybe I'm overthinking it. They have the health injector, so you get random health from enemies. It's always 28, or is that just the difficulty I'm on? It's a weird number to me. It's always 28. It's not 25
or 20 or 30, it's 28. Give other types of healing options. So we currently have the health injector. It heals for like, if we have 100 life, I'm guessing it's like around 40. Add other options. Add a stim. He puts his arm out, he just goes like this, real quick use. But it only heals for like maybe 25, so it's like less, but it's instant. Now you have an option, right? Add another variant, like a pill or something that he takes. Doesn't work with the helmet, but something else he does anyway. And it's a slow acting agent. It like heals very slowly over like 5 minutes or something. Then you have a choice. It's like, do I want to use the most effective healing per dollar spent or whatever? That's the long term. If I want to use a middle ground, I use the health injector. A really fast but weaker heal, I use the like stim thing. Stims would be a good thing in general. You could do an adrenaline stim too, like another kind of buff effect where it makes you do more damage, maybe take less damage and like less recoil for like a minute. I do enjoy the game. I just had high expectations. I do think that Glenn is going to work to fix this, because if you notice, okay, poor freaking Glenn, dude. Did you notice how much weight he gained? I kind of feel bad for even saying this. Watch the interview videos. He wears this giant bulky gray shirt and he has gained a lot of weight. I'm totally not surprised to see that. Striking Distance Studios, it's like his baby, right? This is going to be his legacy. And the Callisto Protocol is their first game. So it's like really important to make a good impression. They got that patch out quickly. Games are complicated these days. It's not a surprise that it was running poorly when it first came out. So I think that with like updates and DLC, it would not surprise me to see like an apology update, like, hey, we added this content because we kind of goofed up at first. I do think they're going to make it right. Not that there was anything majorly wrong, but it's a little rough around the edges, let's be honest. You know, I've been critiquing it for the last 15 minutes, but he does seem like he's under a lot of stress. Time will tell. Hopefully I'm right. I'm excited for new content for the game. That concludes my thoughts. And again, if you're on the fence for this game, wait for a sale or a content drop to sweeten the deal. If you like action horror, like Dead Space or survival horror type games, I say get it. I think you'll like it. Thank you.